Hello, welcome. Welcome to this thematic session on what's next in the biotech and genomic revolution. I am S.V. Lo, CEO of the Hong Kong Genome Institute, and your modulator for this panel session. I'm very honored to be joined by 4 distinguished panelists for our discussion today. Let me firstly introduce Dr. Eric Green. Eric is the director of the National Human Genome Research Institute at the National Institutes of Health of the United States of America. He is an internationally acclaimed genomics researcher who has had significant start-to-finish involvement in the Human Genome Project. Eric has contributed significantly to the body of scientific knowledge, having authored and co-authored over 340 scientific publications. Next, Dr. Megan Palmer. Megan is the Executive Director of Biopolicy and Leadership Initiatives at Stanford University. In this role, she leads integrated research, teaching and engagement programs to explore how biological science and engineering is shaping our societies and to guide innovation to serve public interest. Thirdly, Dr. Brian Chung. Brian is the Chief Scientific Officer of the Hong Kong Genome Institute and Clinical Associate Professor at the Department of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine, School of Clinical Medicine, the University of Hong Kong. Brian is a clinical geneticist who is now leading the implementation of the Hong Kong Genome Project, which is the first large-scale population genome project in Hong Kong. Brian has published approximately 200 peer-reviewed publications. Lastly, but not least, Professor Soon-Bum Park. Professor Park is the founder and Chief Executive Officer of the Spark Biopharma in South Korea and Professor of Chemistry Department at Seoul National University. Spark Biopharma is an up-and-coming company that develops novel small molecule therapeutics to improve human health through the integration of biology, chemistry, proteomics, and informatics. Now, my fellow panelists, more than 30 years after the launch of the Human Genome Project, tremendous scientific advances have been made in the biotech and genomic field, leading directly to, amongst other things, improvements in human health. With an eye on the next decade and beyond, may I ask each of you, starting with Eric, to share your insight on what's next in the biotech and genomic revolution. Eric, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me share my screen and immediately say it's a pleasure to be here speaking with you, and very much in the spirit of what's next for human genomics is a very timely thing for me to talk about, and I'm happy to do that. I lead the National Human Genome Research Institute, which is one of the 27 institutes and centers that make up the National Institutes of Health in the United States. We are the institute that was created in the United States to help lead the US's effort in the Human Genome Project. And when the Human Genome Project, which you heard just started about over 30 years ago, but when it ended about 19 years ago, we immediately put out as an institute a vision for what was going to be next in genomics starting in 2003. We then updated that vision and with a new publication in 2011, and that guided us to the end of last decade. And then in October of 2020, in Nature, we published, after a couple years of engaging the community in strategic planning, we published this strategic vision, which is entitled Strategic Vision for Improving Human Health at the Forefront of Genomics, the cutting edge of genomics, the tip of the spear, if you will, which very much was about our vision of the elements that would be needed for improving human health. And we definitely have a health focus, at the National Institutes of Health for the coming decade. So when asked what's next for genomics in particular, which is the field I work in, less in a government-based research institution that funds genomics research in the United States and in other places in the world, in these 10 pages of Nature, and I would strongly encourage you, if you've not read this document, to please go to this URL shown here, download that paper, and please read those 10 pages, because we articulate, I think, what's going to be an exciting set of developments coming in human genomics for the coming decade. One of the things we also did, which I want to share because I think it would be fun to set up some of the conversations, is at the end of this strategic vision, we laid out 10 bold predictions for human genomics, really very much in the spirit of what's next for the coming decade. And I want to share a video with you that goes through these 10 audacious, bold predictions. Now, they're intended to be inspirational and aspirational because they are mostly pointing in the direction of the areas that we are moving towards and that we would love to get to in the next 10 years. But I will immediately tell you, many of them are high risk and many of them are going to be difficult to fully attain, but at least it shows you 10 major areas that we are moving towards. So please sit back and watch this short video.
Genomics, which is the study of all DNA in an organism called the genome, is changing the way we practice medicine, how we manage and treat some previously incurable diseases, and our relationship with society at large. Since the 1950s, double helix and DNA have become household words, standing in for the historic discovery of the 4 chemicals that give us life, commonly abbreviated as A, C, G, and T. Genomics is at an age of innovation and invention like no other, all thanks to how strings of those 4 letters encode the information for creating and operating something as complicated as a human body. Springing forward from the success of the Human Genome Project, a massive reduction in the cost of sequencing a human genome, and the dawn of the CRISPR gene editing era, genomics is leading into an even more audacious future, a future that will define our collective lives for decades to come. But what could this future look like? Here is a summary of 10 bold and fantastical predictions made by experts at the National Human Genome Research Institute and the genomics community for the next decade of human genomics. While most are unlikely to be fully attained by 2030, achieving even one or more of these by that time would have lasting impact for science, medicine, and society. Prediction 1. Sequencing and analyzing a complete human genome will become commonplace for any research laboratory. Prediction 2. The role of every gene in the human genome will be known. Prediction 3. Environmental influences on our genome will be routinely used for making predictions about health and disease. Prediction 4. Genomics will no longer use social constructs such as race in human research studies. Prediction 5. Student projects involving the study of millions of people's genome sequences will be regularly featured at school science fairs. Prediction 6. Genomic testing will become commonplace in medicine, just like a standard blood test is used now. Prediction 7. It will be readily known if a given letter difference in a person's DNA is clinically important. Prediction 8. A person's complete genome sequence will be available on their smartphone in a user-friendly form. Prediction 9. Advances from human genomics will benefit all of society and not just a few. Prediction 10. Genomic discoveries and technologies will help cure more genetic diseases than ever before. How do we get there? The National Human Genome Research Institute is committed to leading research to make such predictions a reality. Learn more about the Institute's 2020 strategic vision for the future of human genomics by visiting genome.gov/2020SV. Dive deeply into a field that continues to transform medicine and will hopefully continue to bring curiosity, purpose, and compassion for people everywhere.
So I look forward to hearing from the other panelists and having a discussion about some of these bold predictions and these ideas of what's next and some of the ideas that the other panelists have as well.
Thank you very much indeed, Eric. It's very bold predictions indeed. And of course, with this prediction that we can achieve them, that will bring other consideration, particularly on the ethical, legal, and also policy arena. And this is where Megan comes in. Megan, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. I'm going to forego slides and videos and just share some of my insights directly with all of you. I'm a biological engineer by training, but I've spent the last 2 decades working at the intersection of biotechnology and policy, largely in the field known as synthetic biology. And synthetic biology really represents the foundational tools and the frameworks that are enabling biotechnology, bioengineering, and the so-called bioeconomy. I've had the great fortune to work with a variety of different groups on developing their strategies for advancing biotechnology responsibly. One of these groups that you may have heard of is the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, or iGEM. iGEM is now in its 19th year and is engaging students in hundreds of teams across dozens of countries. Another recent effort was co-chairing a World Economic Forum Global Future Council on synthetic biology. And this last group, the World Economic Forum Council, looked at exactly today's question: what is next in the biotech revolution? And critically, what should we be focusing on now so that advances are really realized in the interests of all people and the planet? So that I would share a few points from a short piece that was developed by this group for a report called Future Focus. It did look at the relatively near future, 2025, but explored some key trends, as Eric highlighted, aspirational visions, as well as some strategic pathways towards them. And I won't have the chance to go through all of these, but you have the opportunity to look at that online as well. So first, some key trends. I think it's important to look at the much longer history of our engagements with biology, right? Biology is a 4 billion-year-old technology that evolved us and everything we care about. But as Eric highlighted, we're learning as humans to interact in much more precise ways, to harness its power and develop technologies across a wide variety of applications. So it's not only health and medicine, as we're speaking about today, but also in manufacturing and food, remediation, energy, and even data storage. And if employed thoughtfully and responsibly, the applications of biotechnology can respond to the world's social, environmental, and economic needs. However, it's also important to keep in mind that if this technology is not carried forward thoughtfully, there are many forms of harm, undermining individual and collective security, limiting freedoms, reinforcing inequities. And so it's important that we steward this technology carefully. There are a number of key developments that we're seeing now that are worth paying attention to. One of the largest is growing bioeconomies. So advances in genomics and synthetic biology are enabling these applications, and some are estimating these applications to be worth north of $4 trillion a year globally for the next decade. And this is leading companies and countries alike to develop their bio strategies of how they are going to pursue this technology. And so these aren't fully formed yet, but they are forming quite rapidly. The second is on platform-driven biosciences. So the broadening of biological data sets and powerful engineering tools are really accelerating the scope and scale of what's possible in this space. And those who are stewarding the technology and the data, they have significant power and they're in significant responsibility in steering the trajectory of this revolution. So really the last 2 decades, and as we highlighted before, really 50 years or more now, have delivered new tools, approaches, and communities that are developing this technology. And now the challenge is how to develop both a vision as well as a pathway and partnerships to realize the vast promises and benefits in the decades to come. So second, a few key visions that the group focused on. The first is to build a bioeconomy for everyone, everywhere, made by everyone. And that means that we envision, all countries around the world having the capacity to build bio-based circular economies, transition from polluting economies, and developing the types of innovations for health and well-being of all communities, local and global. And we envision that the tools, technologies, and the data capabilities underlying these initiatives are shaped by all members of society for the benefit of all. This goal, it's ambitious, but it informs strategy, policy, and practice at all levels, including within regulatory and oversight policies, as well as the types of investment and benefit sharing agreements that we need to see these. And to build this foundation, we'll really need a recommitment from all types of organizations and nations to be thinking about what it means to safeguard our biological future against potential misuses. So this is not only protecting against biological threats to our health, but this is what enables the peaceful purposes to flourish and advance in a world in which everyone is entrusted and empowered to be a biological citizen if we are really in a biological age. The second, and much to the topic that we're speaking about today, is how do we safeguard the global commons to maximize cooperation and benefits? So bioscience data and technology infrastructures are very valuable and a valuable commons, and we need to be fostering improved cooperation across borders and across sectors. And so we need to be recognizing the increased power inherent in ownership and control of these biological assets and distributing the capabilities equitably. To do so, we'll need new types of private-public partnerships to build these shared global knowledge repositories. And this is really not a trivial task and something we need to commit to in the decades to come. And so I'll just end there by saying in this type of future, cross-border, cross-sector collaborations will need to be open, effective, and wherever possible, transparent. I will end there and just say we outline a few different strategies in many different sectors and pathways to realizing these types of visions. And I look forward to hearing from other speakers on their visions and strategies to get there.
Thank you very much, Megan. There are many issues that you have raised there. And I will want to come back an issue later on to you on the governance side, on how on a global scale we can have a governance framework to realize the advances in this biotech and genomic era. Yeah, now I think it's very opportune time for us to go to Brian, for you to share the local view on Hong Kong.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lo, for the kind introduction. My name is Brian Chung. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of the Hong Kong Genome Institute. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to share the forum with all these very important speakers. I'm glad that the first two speakers have set a very good stage for me to introduce what I'm going to talk about, the Hong Kong Genome Project, particularly Dr. Eric Green, for him and the other scientists that is involved actually from the very first chapter of human genetics, Human Genome Project, to now that we are now ready to make genomics mainstream in medicine. So as I've said, I'm going to talk about Hong Kong Genome Project. This can serve as an example of what we are doing in Asia to prepare for what's next for genomic medicine. First, a little bit about the history. All started in 2017 in Hong Kong, when our chief executive actually mentioned in her policy address, we would like to harness new technology for better public health policies and clinical outcomes. So therefore, a steering committee on genomic medicine was set up to map out strategies for the development of genomic medicine in Hong Kong. In the next year, the steering committee actually put forward 8 recommendations, and that's include the launching of the citywide Hong Kong Genome Project as a catalyst for the development of genomic medicine in Hong Kong. The government actually accepted the recommendations in full, and planned to establish the Hong Kong Genome Institute to implement the project. And the Hong Kong Genome Institute actually commenced food operations last year in 2021. And we have launched the pilot phase of the project in summer last year. And at that time, we focused on undiagnosed disease and also hereditary cancers as our two main themes. This year, I'm very glad to tell you that in July 2022, we have rolled out our main phase in stages. And in the main phase of our project, we cover not only undiagnosed disease, hereditary cancers, but a third theme, genomics and precision health, to widen the coverage to the other discipline of medicine. We have laid out a strategic plan for the next 3 years. So 2022 to 25, and this is our strategic plan. And in this strategic plan, we actually use the guiding principle laid down from the Steering Committee for Genomic Medicine in Hong Kong, and there are 4 strategic foci. First, we want to accelerate the integration of genomic medicine into clinical care. Second, we would like to advance research in genomic science, especially the translational research. And thirdly, we emphasize on nurturing talents in genomic medicine. And fourthly, we would like to do work to enhance public genomic literacy and engagement. This is some of the strategies that we have put down in our strategic plan. Many of them are core strategies and are exploratory strategies. So the core development that we're focusing on right now is the development of the infrastructure for whole genome sequencing, bioinformatics, genetic counseling, and how that would facilitate personalized healthcare and treatment in patients. As you can see, we put a lot of emphasis to refer to the patient journeys, especially those that are having problems that could be potentially benefited by the development of genomic medicine. We realized that we have to plan forward and to enhance the full functionalities of whole genome sequencing and the other genome technologies. We need to develop functional studies, multi-omics. We need to develop a low-code databases, because nowadays, although we have a lot of development in genomics, many a times data about Asians, especially Chinese, is still not enough. We have to enhance genomic diversity by developing our own databases. And all these work cannot be successful if we're doing it alone. So collaboration and partnership, both locally in the clinical implementation and internationally, to share our voice with international stakeholders, it's of utmost importance. And we plan to work towards the goal of the Hong Kong Genome Project. And our vision is to avail genomic medicine to all for better health and well-being. And we do that through partnerships with the hospitals, with the industries, and with the universities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Brian, for introducing our Hong Kong Genome Project. And as you have said, we have actually learned a lot from our international collaborators. And there's a theme that runs through your presentation that ties in very well with what Eric has said, which is something to do with implementation. And I want to return to this theme, the issue of implementation science, to Eric and you later on. Yeah. Now we can go to Xuan Bum for your insight, for sharing your insight, please.
Thanks, SV. It's quite exciting to hear that Eric's mentioned about for the bold predictions in 2030, which is not so far away from now. And so it's quite exciting, and it will make a big impact. And also Megan's for policies may have a very important impact in the bio-industry itself, as well as academia. And it's a local view by Brian is also quite exciting. Myself, the main role is the professor. I've been trained as an organic chemist, and I've been a faculty at Seoul National University for over 20 years. And I'm trying to say something on these sessions as a biotech side of view, which I using I'm not generating data for genomics, but I use as an end user of genomic information to utilize something valuable. So my main role is in the professors, but it's also as a CEO founder Spark Biopharma. And as a biotech company, there's many approaches for making the drug development, and I'm more on small molecule based drug discovery guy. And the drug discovery is based on target based approaches, which is given target based on the genomic studies, and that giving for the gene product, and that target validation and assay development screening will give the hit molecule out of the target based approaches, which is very rational, and more than 90% of the industry is working on this target-based approach, which is very successful. But then the other side of approaches is using phenotype-based approaches, which is a bit different from this open question type approach and very much discovery-driven. So in that, the way I just simply illustrated what that approach's differences between these target-based and phenotype-based approaches. Target-based is based on genomic information, and then say certain protein like pipa gammas. Maybe those is one of the key protein for the regulating diabetes. And it was known that this is the validated target. The farmers working on to making high throughput assay to identify hit molecule and find the proper key for the lock, which is the target proteins. And there can be generating many different proteins that the candidate, but it's, as you can see here, and pioglitagen, losiglitagen looks very similar, means there's a given lock will give the very limited variation of the keys for that manners. In contrast, phenotype-based approach is how they define disease. Like diabetes is the disease, there's inefficient uptake of glucose may causing that disease. So what I view that is, if we can visualizing this cellular glucose uptake by fluorescence labeled glucose, we can monitor in organism and cell upon the treatment of siRNA or genes and small molecule can make an image-based screening that will give the very much diverse hit molecule can be generated out of this. But so that's a very nice way to making new entity, but it's that have a limitation, because it's for target-based approach, know what the target is, but it's for phenotype-based approaches that doesn't know the target, so it cannot explain the mechanism of actions, though it's effective in cellular and organisms level. So what we envision is we can using the target-based approaches, but that can be quite competitive, and it will be better based on the Eric's and other genomic information can give more inclusive and more comprehensive information about protein rules. But it will be always given information and very competitive. In contrast, what I envision is using the phenotype-based approaches, making the rapid hit identification and target identification in cell-based the manners, so we can explain the mechanism of action can be given. For that purposes, as an academician, over 20 years I've been developing how we can making molecular diversity, which is PDOS, and cell floor, which is how we can visualizing of the disease state by fluorescence probes, and then cell-based target ID method, which is FITG and TS-FITG method that we've been generated. So as academicians, the molecular diversity using phenotypic assay, we can get a lot of different new chemical entity, which is potentially useful for the therapeutic agent, and visualizing biological system and target identification, as well as mode of actions studies can be important, which can be supported by proteomics and genomics information, especially genomics giving very powerful tools to define or predict disease, but proteomics, especially serum proteomics, can be giving information when the disease progression happens, like when we compound treatment or therapeutic treatment giving the positive result, proteomics giving quite huge information about those. So we are focusing on how we can do the target identification to understand mechanism actions. Also, multi-omics of the approaches, especially chemical proteomics, can giving for the information how we can making new therapeutic agent. So what my lab in chemical biology and the lab in Seoul National University tried making a new core technology platform and innovative project making candidate molecule, which transferred to the company that I found 6 years ago, which making lead and candidate and clinical trial. And we have currently like 1 in phase 1 clinical trial, 2 in preclinical stages. So those molecules will be in business development, and the licensing out will be another the plan that we ahead. In addition, we like to put that external asset to our system. So using our platform and information, using genomics and biotechnology, can be making novel knowledge can be transferred to the general public the benefit as a making new therapeutic agent. So that's what we've been doing in my lab. So I can share some of this at the view as a biotech point of view as an end user of genomic information. That's what I can say in here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Sunbam. Very exciting, and seeing how genomic data can help product commercialization, leading to the bioeconomy that Megan has talked about. And the one area that I want to return to you is to get your insight on how genomic has actually accelerated the process of bringing a product from the beginning to the market, based on your experience and your sharing. But I want to come back to Eric and Brian on the implementation science part of it. The very bold prediction by Eric and colleagues, I find them very exciting. And I've read your very important papers guiding the use of the genomic into clinical care from bench to bedside. Can you share with us your thoughts on the facilitator and the barriers on implementation side of things, Eric, from the bench to clinical bedside, please?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, and certainly, you know, increasingly since the Genome Project ended 19 years ago, our attention is intensified on clinical applications of genomics. But as you point out, this requires a familiarity with the science of implementation in healthcare, which is a set of challenges in and of themselves. And I often like to point out that, you know, the field of genomics grew up at first during the Genome Project, where the focus was mostly the work of basic scientists. And yes, there were physician scientists like me who were involved, but we didn't think about healthcare then. We were mostly just thinking about how to characterize the human genome. And I think the biggest shift that we've seen, certainly since the Genome Project ended, but in particular the last 10 years, is the reality that there are opportunities to use genomic information to change the practice of medicine. But, and there is a big but, and I'd love to point this out in an international forum such as this, it then requires you to do something in healthcare. And there is nothing, I think, more complicated than the ecosystem of healthcare. And at an international level, we all could look at our individual countries and we can immediately point out the wonderful things we have in healthcare and the horrible things we have in healthcare. And every one of us lives in an ecosystem, often different in each country, with its good qualities and its bad qualities. And we also all have experienced watching anything change the practice of medicine being difficult and being slow and requiring all sorts of hurdles. And those hurdles are sometimes the same country to country, or sometimes they're different country to country. And so, you know, I have the greatest familiarity with what's going on in the United States, where we have a very federated healthcare system with lots of different payers and lots of different systems, and it's very complicated. And then I compare that to other countries, such as in the United Kingdom, single payer, they're surging ahead much faster. They're doing some amazing things, as are some other countries, because of the way their healthcare system is organized. But most important, what I would stress is that those of us who have been working in genomics, or even those who have arrived in genomics recently, must now contend, if we're interested in seeing genomic medicine become a reality, we must be willing to deal with all of the hurdles inherently present in the ecosystem of healthcare delivery, whether it's how it gets paid for, how it gets regulated, how you convince the professional societies, how you convince the practitioners, whether it be physicians or nurses or pharmacists, et cetera, and it's hard. But we do it through research, at least in the United States. We build up a research base, we generate evidence, and then we put that into the ecosystem and hope that the right people will be convinced that this is going to be an effective way to improve medicine.
Thank you, Eric. For Brian, you mentioned previously, genomic is medicine, and we see genomic medicine as the future of medicine. Share us your thought on this, on the implementation side.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lo. First of all, I concur with all the things that Dr. Eric Green has mentioned. And indeed, I think that the Hong Kong government has a great plan to have Dr. Lo on board, because right now we are at the stage of implementing genomics in healthcare, in medicine, and Dr. Lo is a very experienced health administrator. So he can really help and lead the Institute in our very difficult path of implementing genomics in medicine. What I'm trying to say is because of the evolving nature of genomics, it's a fast-growing science, we really need to be multidisciplinary and be very upfront to face all these challenges. So I think for implementation, I think building the local workforce is of utmost importance. Doctors have to upskill themselves, starting from a change in the philosophy of practice, that they should know that genetics and genomics is very important, not only in the classical field of clinical genetics, but actually in all disciplines of medicine. And they need to learn with different people, including the bioinformaticians, the genetic counselors, as well as the lab scientists and the genome curators. And in order to communicate well, actually, they need to start with learning the languages that they're speaking. And I think this is very important. Doctors can work very well within their own team, but now genomic medicine is cross-team, cross-sectors. And I think this is a very important acknowledgement that the doctors should have in Hong Kong system. And I think that the Hong Kong Genome Project serves as a very good catalyst to do this, because we work with what we call the genome champion. So we talk to all the clinicians in the different hospitals, and then we identify areas that genomic medicine may benefit their practice, from diagnosis to prediction to treatment. And we work together through offering projects within our 3 disease themes. And through all these collaborations, we can learn from each other. We learn about the medicine and what are the challenges and what in what area genetics can potentially serve as a solution. And in the same process, the clinicians will learn the power of genomic medicine, and as well as the limitations, so that we can facilitate the clinical implementation through a few hopefully successful examples, and then we expand from there.
Thank you, Brian. So, Megan, as you can hear, genomic science can bring tremendous benefits to human health if used properly. There's always the other side of the coin, which you have pointed out in a very balanced manner. It can cause harm too in the process. So in this regard, share with us your view on the governance framework to harness the goodness side of things and minimizing the harmful side of things of genomic error.
Well, this is certainly an ongoing challenge that is only going to get even more difficult in the years and the decades to come. You know, it's important to keep in mind that this is, still a relatively new field. And so many of the institutions and the practices that we need to safeguard this technology and this approach are being developed. And so there are several different types of challenges, and some have already been highlighted. One is just the scale and scope of the applications, again, not only in health, but in many different areas. And so we need practices that are able to observe and contend with all of those different applications and deal with frankly, the politics and challenges of novelty. Sometimes we don't know exactly what it is that we've developed and what precedents and practice apply. The second is that there's so many different stakeholders who are engaged now, and we just highlighted a few and working across medicine, but there's many more. So these types of applications are causing us to revisit basic assumptions about who are stakeholders and how do we engage those stakeholders effectively and in a timely way, factoring in also the costs of inaction and the comparative cost to other fields. And there's also sort of challenges around bridging principles and practice. We can talk about a lot of the things we'd like to see, but then when it comes to ground truthing, how they apply, that requires a different type of capacity. So I've taken a lot of inspiration, both at the local and the global scale, from the International Genetically Engineered Machine Competition, IGEM, that I mentioned before. So IGEM is largely a student competition that's now 19 years old and involves communities all over the world who are working to develop new innovations, some of which are in medicine and health, and prototype these over the course of the summer. But what we have done in the course of the competition is actually develop incentives to innovate on the policy and the regulatory side alongside innovations in technology. And so it promotes that type of outreach, learning, and engagement that some of the other panelists here have spoken about, to identify where are there missing aspects of the governance structure that we need to fill. It also serves at a global scale as an observatory of developments. Sometimes we just need to see what's happening in order to identify issues that are occurring, again, locally and globally. So if we're able to come together at a regular pacing and frequency to observe what's happening, identify what are the areas of helping and harming, and really develop experiments in governance that we test over time, I'm hopeful that we can deal with the scope and scale of activities that we're facing today.
Thank you, Megan. In implementing our Hong Kong Genome Project, we have had help from our international collaborators tremendously. And there is an implicit trust that the Genome Project is implemented to improve the population health and is for the good side of the genomic medicine. And so we have been very fortunate to receive the advice from Genomic England and Genomic Australia, and from reading Eric's tremendous papers, etc., to avoid the pitfall. So Eric and Brian, I want to come back to you later on the international collaboration front, particularly whether data sharing and research collaboration are some of the areas that we can look forward to more advancement in as we move forward. But I come back to Sun Bam now on the commercialization of the product using genomic advances and technology advancement.
Okay, it's as other panelists mentioned, it's for the genomics make a huge impact on scientists. It cannot be the same and before and after genomic studies, and everyone use for genomic information to utilizing and make a value out of it. But as Eric mentioned, it's for in 2030, it's more the genomic information not be only limited in the scientists, it should be approaching to the general public and practitioners. So using that information more extensively. So using genomic information in general public and practition the area, that might be another direction that you clearly mentioned in here. In the biotech side, I was been heard other like global the CEOs and other meetings, and they mentioned that for drug discovery is to start from science but end with art. Means for many stakeholders and with the different interests and how define market and pros and cons in individual therapeutics can be how they define the pros and cons might be very important in the future development. And in their roles, genomics make a huge impact on it. Once you understand in every single gene product and their roles, that could be giving the much more information, so making directions which allow for make pros and cons and individual therapeutic agent on the in the pipeline. So decision making getting easier. In addition, genomic informations can be using further for how can using the therapeutic agent to the patient as a companion diagnosis. So that's another big impact it can be using of those information for in the process drug discovery in biotech and big pharma. So, but that can be even more expanded in the futures to using those information even to the clinicians, so they can using that for the actual prescription in the future. That might be the directions to go.
Yeah, thank you, Sun-bum. I want to follow on from this because it will lead very nicely on the data sharing part. The question I posed to Eric and Brian. In your experience, in your product development using genomic related data, do you use the genomic data that generated by yourself, your company, or the university, or you have access to the global genomic data?
I'm not sure how much deep level that my colleagues are working on and myself. It's what I appreciate the most about for genomic side of researchers. They tend to share the information, which is quite different from the other small molecules or other drug discovery related. It's more secretive of their information become for the profit or the asset they have to keep. But in the genomic side of researchers, their intention and their goal is to make their data useful for other people. So that's that I appreciate the most about for genomic research and make it more accessible. So I'm not sure the information that I access is generated by Hong Kong or US and Australia. I don't know, but data is there. And there is also have a quality control process. So I can using that reliable information are there, so we can using it in more in a reliable manner. So that's what I appreciate the most. And we are not generating genomic data, but I rather using that information to analyze the effect our compound in based on that information available online for free.
Thank you, Sun-bum. So Eric, international research collaboration and data sharing.
Well, what we just heard from our colleague on this panel is exactly the rationale for the Human Genome Project. It was the rationale for the sharing of genomic data that came out of the two Bermuda meetings that created this really seismic change philosophically in biomedical research to actually share genomic data. And that has followed ever since the Human Genome Project. You know, in my earlier comments, I stressed all the differences between the ecosystems of healthcare and therefore the differences between genomic medicine implementation that might exist among different countries. I didn't mean to imply that we didn't want to share the information and those experiences, because in fact, in many ways, every country is doing a different experiment. And just like the Human Genome Project, we want to share the data from those experiments so that when Hong Kong figures something out in genomic medicine implementation, or England does, or the US does, or Korea does, we share that information and then we try to generalize it within our healthcare systems. Meanwhile, we, like the Human Genome Project, look to opportunities for international sharing of data collaborations. I want to very quickly mention three major international organizations that my institute working with other International funders have stood up and continue to support the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, GA4GH. I mean, this is critically important to work out standards, routines, and policies for sharing data, of genomic data and health data across countries. I am a big supporter of GA4GH. Meanwhile, genomic medicine expertise and experiences are really important to share. So G2MC, the Genomic Medicine, the Global Genomic Medicine Consortium, which is an organization that is sharing expertise through international collaborations. And then most recently, something called the IHCC, which is the International 100K Cohort Consortium. All these different cohorts going on. I know there's a new one now in Hong Kong. You know, please participate in this. The UK Biobank, the All of Us research program, you know, the other programs in different parts of the world. We want those cohorts not only to share the data eventually, but to share the experiences of building up these cohorts, what they're learning from. These are all really complicated things. We want to see these things shared. And so these are several examples of major international consortium. And I think these things are driving the world forward and seeing the promise of genomics come to reality.
Thank you, Eric. Brian?
Thanks, and I agree. International leadership is very important. And I read from the very recent WHO Science Council reports on how to accelerate genomic medicines. Collaborations is one of the 4 key recommendations. And I guess it would be nice if Hong Kong Genome Project can join forces with all these international collaborations, and perhaps Dr. Green can introduce us to these initiatives. Absolutely. But I think internally, we need to do a lot of work as well. I think of utmost importance is to gain trust from our participants. So the data has to be made trustworthy. They need to believe that it is kept in a very good and secured and robust system. And importantly, we need to do good science so that the patients know that it's of good returning value to them, and perhaps not to them, but maybe other patients who share the same medical conditions. So this is a lot of education, a lot of engagement, patient engagement, process to be ongoing. And then in order to make the system trustworthy, we need to work with the legal expert. For example, I tried to read about the GDPR of the European nations. It's very complicated. We really need legal experts so that we know how we can do data sharing. We all agree that data sharing is very important. We also need our ethics advisors, because they would tell us what would be the best way so that we can make sure that the patient's autonomy, confidentialities, and all these issues are protected. And so we can build a system that the patient can trust us, that we're doing good science, and we're doing good science for the public good. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. This has been a tremendous, exciting discussion with our panelists sharing a lot of the relevant issue. We are coming towards the last few minutes of our panel session. So I want to go to each of you to ask you to share your final thoughts and perhaps one key message that you would like our audience to take away. So for instance, with Eric, I would very much love to hear from you, like what can we learn from the US experience, given that you started this genomic medicine era so many years ahead of us here in Hong Kong. Although Hong Kong is an advanced economy, we realize that we started this genomic medicine project actually fairly late in comparison with our other advanced economies. So this is one side of things that I would love to hear from Eric. And then I will go to each of the panel speakers like Megan and Brian and Xuan Bang. Yeah, Eric.
Well, you know, what I would stress is that there are a number of things I'm immensely proud about and what we've done in the United States, but I always immediately point out in genomics, we did not do this alone. You know, the Genome Project quickly became an international effort, and many countries were involved. So I certainly don't think the United States deserves all the credit. And I would meanwhile immediately point out that we don't have the best healthcare system in the world. And so we're stumbling and fumbling a lot with genomic medicine at times because, like everybody's healthcare system, it's imperfect, it's complicated, and it's just many challenges to implement anything. But I also would point out we didn't do everything perfect. And one of the things in the United States we've not done perfect is from the very beginning, making sure that our research participants, especially as we started to gain more and more genomic data, that those participants appropriately represented the diversity, at least of the United States, let alone the diversity of the world. And we are trying to catch up now on improving the diversity of both our research participants in the United States and also the diversity of our workforce in genomics. And these are two very high priorities for us going forward because we feel they're areas that we need to catch up on. If we're going to see genomic medicine implemented broadly and equitably in the United States, we need to pay much more attention to diversity of the research participants, and we need to improve the diversity of our workforce so that we can ensure equity in medicine and not exacerbate health disparities. We can gain quite a bit, again, as I mentioned earlier, through international collaborations. And we think the more we worldwide share data, the more we all will benefit from enhancing the diversity of our genomic data and our genomic workforce. And so it's another motivating reason why we have spent a considerable amount of energies reaching across the different oceans to build collaborations, coalitions, consortium, and so forth, because we think the more information and data is shared, the more we'll enhance genomic medicine implementation and have it be more equitable across countries and really all across humanity.
Thank you, Eric. That's certainly like music to my ears. We will certainly follow up with you after this panel session. Megan, your final thoughts?
Sure. I'll just return to, this is such an exciting time for biotechnology. Many of the tools and capabilities that we've only dreamt of are starting to be realized. It's a very important time for steering the trajectory of these developments so that they are safeguarded in the interests of all people and the planet. And I think this is going to take just as much innovation and rigor in the strategies for policy and ethics and oversight as it will in the technologies. You know, you mentioned, one of our panelists mentioned the complications of GDPR, right? We need friends and colleagues that are able to help us design these types of systems with checks and balances. And that's a great, exciting area for innovation. And I think we can set ambitious goals in this area as well. Eric mentioned, trying to have openness and transparency as much as possible. And I think that extends as well to our governance regimes so that we can do the same type of testing in that area as we do testing in science and technology.
Thank you, Megan. Brian, and then Sun-Pam. Yeah, Brian.
I want to say a few words about Hong Kong. Although we are starting late compared to other countries like the United States and UK, Hong Kong has several strengths. First of all, we have a universal healthcare system, and then we have world-renowned scientists doing genomics research. And most important of all, we have a strong governmental support to develop genomic medicine. I think we can work together with collaborations to build the necessary infrastructure that is cross countries, across sectors, multidisciplinary, and we should prepare ourselves to implement genomic medicine at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Sun-Pam?
As the end user of the genomic information, I much have to express my appreciation for the Eric and the Brian's who actually making data and generalizable and so quite useful. And in the future, what I expect to have it's genomics will be more approachable for the even broader, but it will be that's a DNA sequence. So actually the transcriptomics or proteomics or metabolomics, those multi-omic data has to be integrated. Like Eric might think about this. So not only the genomic information, but that information and flow to the other omics data. When they're integrated, the information is like exponentially increased and valuable. So that's the elements. It's going to be the next in genomic research, not only limited in the genomic research itself. That's what I think.
Yeah,
Completely agree with that.
absolutely. Yeah, and time is coming up, and I want to thank the four of you for participating in this very exciting discussion. And as we enter into this genomic science and genomic medicine era, let's join forces to really make improvement in human health our ultimate goal. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, SB, Eric, and Megan, and Brian.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.